Welcome back, everyone. This is a two-part episode, and we are in the second half. Again, my name is Dr. Yasmin A. Flores, and I'm from the music department here at EPCC. And with me today is Mr. Ted Karber from theater. Hello again. This is the second half, and I have lots of other questions to ask you.
And I hope I have good answers for you.
You always do. So you've taught and worked all across El Paso in various things. And at this point in your career, do you miss acting?
Oh, heavens, no.
Okay.
Not even remotely.
Okay.
You know, every once in a while, yes, I mean, I get this wild idea that maybe I should be in a show or do something.
Yeah.
And then I start thinking about how demanding that really is and how much of your time it takes.
Yes.
And if you're good at it, if you're really going to be good at it, it eats up your entire existence.
Absolutely.
And I think, oh no.
Yeah.
I think I'm perfectly happy directing shows.
Okay.
And I'm not really a great actor. I mean, I'm an okay actor.
Yeah.
But I'm not great. And I'm great in certain parts. But I'm not great in all parts.
Okay.
And but I'm a fairly competent director, so I enjoy that process. I like the process of directing plays. I like coming up with ideas. I like coming up with concepts. I like working with actors.
Yeah.
So that fits the bill for me.
Right, okay. Yeah. I've always wondered that because I find you to be a very engaging, very entertaining person, right? Especially when we're sitting here chit-chatting.
It's so easy when we're chit-chatting. But it's so hard to dodge the fruit and vegetables when they're throwing them at you on the stage if they don't like you. So that's the part I don't want to go through. I mean, not that you're supposed to bring fruit or vegetables and throw them at the actors.
That's right. Keep the tomatoes at home for the spaghetti.
Yes.
So that was something I had always wondered because so you, in your training, in your young years, going through college, you probably did a little bit of everything, right? And so what drew you to directing?
I stumbled into it.
Oh.
I trained to be a playwright, Yasmin. That's what I wanted to do. And I was going to be the next Eugene O'Neill or the next Tennessee Williams or whatever.
I see. Okay.
And I wrote all these deep, dark, and meaningful plays. And the funny thing is, and I look back on it now and I'm like, you were so weird, Ted. You still are, but you were even more weird back then. But I was, 12 years old, 13 years old. I don't know how I ever decided I was capable of doing this. But I would write plays, these full-length plays, these 110-page plays with multiple characters and multiple scenes. And I would take these things and this was long before we had the ability to copy things quickly.
Oh, I see.
I'm old. And I would go to the little copy center down the street. My father would have to drive me down there, and I would make a copy of that play. And I would put it in the mail, and I'd mail it off to the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center National Playwrights Conference.
Oh, wow.
I did that for years, Yasmin.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, I was the strangest child. Everybody else was outside playing, and I was inside typing and working on plays.
Oh,
and I did that for many, many years. And I was a semifinalist twice.
Oh, wow.
And that sounds like, oh, that's nice. But if you look at the parameters of what the National Playwrights Conference used to do, they would receive 2,000 entries, 2,500. And then what they used to do, they don't do this anymore. Now the matriculation of the contest has changed. But many years ago, what they did is they winnowed out a bunch of plays. They got it down to 100. And those 100 plays, out of all of those that were submitted, were the semifinalists. And I was in that number twice.
Oh, nice.
And so that kind of pushed me forward. It gave me hope.
Yeah.
And I've had plays produced. I'm very famous in the state of Ohio. I've had my play produced. And I wrote a one-character comedy called Precious Heart, and that was done frequently in Ohio because I had a good theater friend there who did the play. But when I was in my graduate studies at UTEP, and a friend of mine, a theater friend, said, we want to do this play. Are you willing to direct it? And I'm like, sure, I'll direct it. I had no idea what I was doing.
Okay.
None.
Yeah.
No earthly concept about what directing was. So I go in and we rehearse for 6 weeks and I sit there. And then they do the thing and they say, well, and I'm like, oh, it looks really good. And I'm like, then I thought I was directing. And then it was a horrible experience.
Okay.
For many different reasons. But they were competent actors, so it looked good on the stage.
Yeah.
And I, in my youthful stupidity, thought I had done a good job. And then someone, I think at the university, said to me, you directed that? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, what? And then as time went on, people started saying things about, not bad things, not unkind, just observations.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, how did you come to this decision? And I'm like, I don't know. It just happened. They did it. I liked it. It was okay.
Right. You're right.
And as I went through the process and I got to the other side of it, I realized that's not directing.
Yeah.
That's sitting in a chair and, drinking Diet Coke. Right. Is what it was. And so I didn't direct again for like 2 years.
Okay.
And I had a professor in college whose name was Roberto Pomo, who taught at UT El Paso in the theater department. And he went to a wonderful consortium or, I don't know, some big conference that lasted all summer long. And I remember Roberto gave me the key to his office. Oh. And the walls of Roberto's office were lined with books. Oh. And he said, he was from Argentina, Dad, go into my office and read whatever you want to read. So all summer long, I went in that office and I laid on the floor and I read.
Yeah.
And I came across a play called Going to See the Elephant.
Oh.
About 4 women on the plains of Kansas in the late 1890s. And I fell madly in love with it. And I thought, oh, I want to direct this.
Oh, yeah.
And I realized something, Yasmin. I realized that I had to direct things that I loved in one way or another.
Right.
And I directed plays that I had to direct because they were set. I was told, we'd like you to do this, and I would go, okay. And I'd do it, but it was not one of those things that was near to my heart.
Right.
But if the play is near to my heart and I want to do it, it's a whole different experience.
Yeah.
So I did Going to See the Elephant, and I learned how to be a director.
Okay.
It taught me how to direct.
Now let's break down what directing is, because again,
you just sit in a chair and drink Diet Coke.
Right.
It's very simple.
Well, it sounds like I'm your next director then. No, I'm just kidding.
And I'll do a scene from Hello, Dolly.
Right, exactly. That's so great. Yeah, so we've got the acting, we've got, Dominic is your stage person, right?
He's
who
the
builds
scenic designer.
Yes, scenic
lighting designer, sound designer, general factotum.
Yes. And then you're the person that tells them where to stand?
A director does.
Okay.
A director envisions the play physically on the stage.
Okay.
And we call that blocking.
Right.
And blocking is the movement I give you as an actor. Lots and lots of people think that plays just happen magically, that it's kind of like, allowing seeds to spring into bloom and you just water and put them in the sun and it happens. Plays aren't like that. Right. And people are always amazed. My parents were always horrified at the amount of time I spent in rehearsals. We rehearse plays from auditions. Mm-hmm. We are generally in rehearsals for 6 to 8 weeks.
Right.
We are in rehearsals every night, Monday through Friday, from 7 p.m. to 9:30 or 10 p.m.
Wow.
So when young actors come to me and say, oh, I want to be an actor, I'm like, that's great. And when they come and audition, I always say in auditions, I want you to understand the time requirements of this commitment.
Yes.
What does a director do? Well, the thing you hope a director does is you hope that a director at some point in the reading of the play, prior to the auditions, he or she comes up with some conceptualization as to how he or she sees that play on the stage.
Okay.
And there are 2 kinds of concept. There's what we call a high concept, and there's a core concept. A core concept is when you do, and I teach this in my theater appreciation class, when you do Romeo and Juliet and you set it in the Renaissance. So Yasmin is playing Lady Capulet and she's dressed in a Renaissance gown and she has a Renaissance hat and she has a Renaissance hairdo, and the costume looks like a Renaissance, Italian villa or whatever it is.
Right.
And there's Renaissance music. That's a core concept.
Right.
A high concept is when you take Romeo and Juliet and you pluck it out of that time frame.
Oh.
And you do that in hopes of highlighting different ideas about that play that you hope will speak to the audience.
Got it.
So in the 1990s, Leonardo DiCaprio did a version of Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
And he set it in contemporary times.
Yes.
And they were all kind of dressed in these beachy clothes,
Yes.
like these, I don't know, these Hawaiian shirts. And rather than having rapiers or swords, they had guns and knives.
Yes.
That's a high concept. So you have to come up with that.
Okay.
And then from that point, you express that to your designers. This is my view for the play.
Okay.
And then hopefully, if you're lucky, your designers work with you within the parameters of that concept.
Right.
And then your job is to take the concept and the things that the designers give you and the talent that the actors have, and you make them into a unified, codified whole. And people will say, and I've had people say, how do you do this? And I don't know.
Yeah.
It just happens. And I know that sounds like I'm being facetious, but I'm not. If you work the play, if I work your scene moment by moment, line by line, word by word, and we will look at what the character wants in that scene and where that character is going,
right,
that builds the scene. That builds you as a character. That builds the play. And I've worked with directors who were the sitting in the chair drinking the Diet Coke directors.
Right.
And at times, as an actor, you want to turn to them and say, give me something.
Yeah.
Tell me something.
Right.
And I always warn actors, I warn all of them before we start. I always say, I am controlling, I know what I want, I am in your face, I will be on that stage beside you.
Right.
And I think in the beginning, they're all horrified. They're
Yeah.
all terrified.
Right.
But I think they realize at some point, hopefully early on, that the process that I have developed as a director will get us to a point where at least it's marginally successful.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm a very active director.
That's good.
I don't
Yeah.
sit and drink Diet Coke.
Right.
I'm involved in every moment of the play. And if I don't get you to move the way I want you to, I get up there and I move you around. And I just, they laugh at me because they're like, why don't you do this instead of me?
Right.
You know.
So then when you let's picture a TV show for a moment. That's most people's familiarity,
Sure.
right? And so I expect, and it isn't until you watch these things like on YouTube or on some channel where they'll give you behind the scenes, and you don't realize, as you're pointing out, all the logistics. And so in rehearsal, sometimes something doesn't work. They have to totally throw it out. Like this cereal box was in the way. I've watched Friends reruns 100 times, and they talk about a pillar that was in the original set to the apartment, to Monica's apartment, and how they finally got rid of it in one season because it was just getting in the way. Like the camera had to kind of dance around it. And so similarly, so how much, when you purchase or when you rent a script, right, the play, and the rights, how much of it is in the script? Like, she will be holding this purse, she will nervously be pacing up and down. Is that usually like, and it's usually in brackets, right?
It's also italicized sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
How much of it is already in the script, and how much of it is you just thinking to yourself, you know what, I think this character is nervous, this character's whatever?
I think it's a combination.
Okay.
And it also depends on the playwright.
Okay.
Modern playwrights, generally speaking, don't give you a lot of stage direction.
Okay.
They tend not to give you as much.
I see.
Some of them don't give you anything.
Oh, got it.
Some of them, it's all interpretation.
Okay.
In the past, when we were dealing with what we considered the playwrights from the golden age of, the creation of American theater, Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, Lillian Hellman, they gave you very specific, very detailed stage directions.
Okay.
Now here's the deal. Sometimes stage directions come from a playwright. But sometimes when you're working with something called an acting edition, which is the version of the play that you get from the play agent, the representative, the publisher.
Sure.
Sometimes the blocking and the stage directions that are in those versions may have come from a combination of sources. They may have come from directors, they may have come from actors, they may have come from the playwright, they may have come from a stage manager.
Okay.
And those things sometimes get encapsulated into that version that we call the acting edition.
Oh.
As a director, if it says, okay, so there is something called obligatory action. And if something is obligatory, that means that Yasmin, who is the damsel in distress, has to run up the stairs and then throw the baby over the rail.
Yes.
That's given to you as stage direction in that script. And I, as a director, hopefully am smart enough to read that and go, this is important because at one point, Princess Yasmin says, "Here, catch!"
Yeah.
And the baby comes flying down to the floor.
Right.
So that's a stage direction that is obligatory. Sometimes it's said, and there were playwrights who were very guilty of this, who say, Princess Yasmin stops. She cocks her head to the left. She twists one eye upward. She sticks her tongue to the right side of her mouth and gives us a look of anguish. And I read that and go, we're not doing that. Okay,
Oh.
So some of it
you
is
have that.
character lesson.
Okay.
So I do what is obligatory.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll keep what they've done just because it makes sense or I think it is valuable.
Yeah.
But sometimes you cut it out.
Okay.
Because you have purchased the dialogue. You have purchased the rights to the dialogue.
Oh, I see.
But not necessarily the stage directions.
Interesting.
You've purchased for a limited time to use the words of the playwright. But you haven't necessarily purchased that intellectual property of putting that play on the stage.
Okay.
What a play is, Yasmin, the only thing a play is it's a blueprint. That's not the play.
Right.
The play is the thing you do on the stage. That's just a guide. That thing that you read is just a guidebook. It's like music.
Sure.
It's just a guidebook.
Right.
Your interpretation of those notes is different.
Right.
Yours is going to be different from someone else. Just like my direction of a play will be different from whoever's.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of those things that I try to teach students very early on. The play is your guidebook. It tells you what the possibilities are. So.
I like that. And so you just cleared up a lot of it for me, because there are times that I wonder, how do these students know how to come out, how fast to walk out? Because that's another famous one, and this happens to performers too. I've seen some folks come out, and like they're in a race. They run out on stage and just, and maybe I'm guilty. I might be guilty of it sometimes too. We're just in a hurry to get going. And so, but it starts to look a little awkward on stage, like, okay, you didn't have to be that excited.
Right.
And so it's those sorts of things that as a director, that's where you intervene and say, okay, slower this time.
Calm down.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So theater, one of the cornerstones of theater is interpretation.
Oh, right.
And that's what I try to teach students.
Yeah.
And I try to teach them the sky's the limit, because that's what can make you noticeable is your interpretation.
Right.
It's your ability to interpret a piece of dialogue that makes you a good actor.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes they don't understand that there's a world of possibilities about that.
Right. And you've had, I know, several years back, there was a production that you all did where sometimes they don't want to obey that direction.
No. Sometimes we have actors who think they know better than anybody else.
Right.
And that's when you have to kind of encourage them to follow the plan, because
Yes.
that's important. But yeah.
Yeah. And so in Hollywood, when that happens, sometimes they're just axed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, from the production.
Oh, yeah.
And they're just told, like, anyways, and so they find somebody else, for better or for worse. And so that's really fascinating. So you're basically, you picture these scenes, and similar in opera. So right when you were talking earlier about, what did you just call it? You called it high and core.
A high concept and a core concept.
High concept and core concept. So core being the flexible one, where you can move it from
high
time.
being is flexible.
High is flexible.
Yeah, when you can change the time frame or change whatever you want. You know.
Yeah, and
in order to do that, though, you do have to get permission if it's copyrighted.
Okay.
Just so everybody knows.
Okay, interesting. I saw Barber of Seville. There was a beautiful production where they took it out of its time period, and everyone was dressed in white.
Oh, okay.
The whole set, everything was white. It was really beautiful, actually, with this beautiful lighting. I don't remember if Juan Diego Flores, he's one of the artists that I follow. I think he might have been involved in that production, but famous opera singer. But yeah, so they had this cart with wheels, and that was supposed to be the barber's setup. And so he's out there singing, et cetera, and all these gorgeous, beautiful dresses, but everything was white, different shades of white, and it was really stunning. And but because most people are used to seeing the Barber of Seville set in its original time period, et cetera, but yeah, and so we see it a lot in opera, and then there's interpretations that are newer, like for example, Rent is La Boheme,
right?
And some of these others that are basically same storyline and everything, but just reconceptualized, if that's a word.
It is.
Yes.
And it's the word that does describe that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so really some stunning ideas. So for you, do you prefer less or more?
Depends on the show.
Okay.
If I do Henrik Ibsen, if I do Hedda Gabler or A Doll's House, I'm probably going to want more.
Okay.
Because that's what those plays are about.
Tennessee Williams.
That's what I would. That's kind of. I have a term that I use. We call it kind of selective realism.
Oh.
So we try to create what Milton Leach would have called you capture the time spirit, but you also try to be. And Williams is very forgiving. Williams, I think, is a very forgiving playwright. You try to interpret what that means. You try to interpret the set. You try to interpret the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, in Anna was definitely a high concept.
Yeah.
I mean, ordinarily, if you were doing Anna, you would have these exquisite sets that look like, those parlors in, Imperial Russia.
Yeah.
And you'd have all of the women dressed like Anna was dressed in these exquisite dresses, and men in frock coats and, waistcoats and all that kind of stuff. And I chose to go a different route because I wanted to highlight certain things about Anna's story. I wanted, and you mentioned in the previous segment, you mentioned Anna's costume being taken from her.
Yes.
Losing the capelet, losing the bodice, and the hind end, whatever it's called, the bustle.
The bustle.
And I did that, and that was one of my first concepts for the play, because it's my theory that she is basically stripped of who she is by society as the play unfolds. And I thought that would help underline that idea.
Yeah, and it was stunning.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was stunning, and so I think that's fascinating to me. And so you did. I'm trying to remember with our student DeAndre.
That was Streetcar.
Streetcar
Named Desire.
Yes. Was that heavy directing? Like, in other words, or did it give you? Was it very specific?
That's Williams. That's Tennessee. So. There are many. There's 5 million productions every year of that play,
right?
Because it's his most famous play, next to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and so you have lots of things to refer to. That script has lots and lots of information in it.
Okay.
But there's also, there's something called what I call the Playwright script, the original Playwright script. And I have a copy of that play, of Streetcar, when it was originally published. Sometimes when you get that original copy, it's what the playwright wrote, as opposed to that acting edition, which may have edits or cuts or additions or descriptions.
Yes.
And when you look at that Playwright, and I'm lucky enough to have an old copy of Streetcar, I know what that original script looked like. So a lot of what's in that acting edition does come from Williams. But because I've done so much Williams, I can look at what is in that script and I can say, I'm almost sure this was not Tennessee. This was the director, or this was a stage manager.
Interesting.
But a lot of what you saw on the stage with Streetcar was a combination of that script and what I interpreted. That was my second time doing Streetcar. I had done it many years ago.
Okay.
And then I did it again. And it was a good experience. I had a really good cast.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But yeah, that was a combination.
Okay.
And most of them are.
Yeah.
Most plays are combinations of what your interpretation is and what the script tells you.
That is, you are a wealth of information, Ted.
Well, thank you.
I always appreciate having you on the show because I learn a lot. The folks at home learn a lot from you and from the theater department. If you all are interested in joining the theater department, you can contact Mr. Karber at tkarberj at epcc.edu, and your extension is?
I'm at 915-831-3205.
3205. Excellent. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. You know where to find us. Until next time, we appreciate you. Ta-ta. Bye for now.